The Lifepath Dialogues explores the many threads that weave together an expressive, celebrated life. I'm your host, Carla Woody. In October 2012, I was in Lafayette, Louisiana, where I interviewed Becca Begnaud during a gathering of her Healing Arts Collective. Becca is a Traiteur, a Cajun healing tradition with a long history. We're going to join the interview just as Becca begins to explain who the Cajun people are.
The French language dominated, but not because of a political thing. We have German families and we have Spanish families. A lot of Native American tribes, as a whole tribe, speak French, and they're now going back to reclaim the language that they let go. It's a phenomenon. And it had nothing to do with, we won't let you do this. You can't speak African or you can't speak your language. It's that we talk French, just French dominated. So the word traiteur is a French name, but it doesn't mean only French people do it.
Okay.
It means French speaking people do it. But because you speak French doesn't mean your family went to Canada. It's a phenomenon. I don't know how to say it other than that, you know. So like, I don't understand why whole tribes of Native Americans and the German people and the Spanish people, and we spoke French. And then in 1928, there was a law that the governor passed here that French could no longer be spoken at school. There are lots of schools of thoughts on everything. I'm just going to give you mine, and you can pull the room and have that many more other thoughts. And I never heard anybody address this from this way, but if everybody spoke French and the teachers at school couldn't let you talk French anymore, doesn't it make sense that the teachers at school could speak French too? Okay?
Right.
So we didn't invite these American people to teach us. They were French teachers who could no longer let these students speak French at school, because if we lived here, and we did, and we were isolated, and we were, but you grew rice and you grew cows, I don't know, whatever, and you needed to do commerce with the rest of this country, which was in English, we weren't going to grow financially. So that was an interdiction. You couldn't, so we all had to go to English. And so from that, the Cajuns learned, and I use the word Cajun as a catch-all phrase, but they're Cajuns and Creoles, Native Americans, all of us who were French-speaking then were not allowed to speak French at school. Now, nobody said you couldn't talk French at home, so some of us continued. And some of us didn't, because some of the families felt like, well, if they don't want us to do that, then you shouldn't do that. Then we had some sort of self-imposed, you must be better if you don't talk French than if you do. And so there was a lot of internal social issues that affected the whole thing. But basically, the word traiteur is a French word. And in France, the word traiteur means a caterer. Well, everybody here knows how to cook, so we don't ever need a caterer. Except now we hire them. Yeah. So you get this French word that means traiteur. But you use it no matter who does this work under this system. So our culture is not just Europeanly influenced. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Okay. So I had the privilege of sharing about this over the years. And it's I don't know, if you tell somebody you do healing work, they either think one of two things. They think you walk on water, or they think you're crazy. And you know, it's neither one of those things. But maybe it's both of those things. So you have this, you don't talk about it for whatever reason. So then, but I did talk about it because it became something I was doing, and I wasn't going to not talk about what I was doing. And so as one who practices this healing here, it's to also see that it's practiced by other peoples here under the same umbrella. So one day I'm giving a presentation at the Miles Perret Center, which is, they offer cancer services here in Lafayette. And this lady says, I have something you might be interested in. And she worked there, and I'm like, okay. So she gave me a thesis that was written by Mr. Charles Bienvenu in 1933. She gave me the book, like it's a thesis. It was written in the Negro French dialect of St. Martin Parish. That's before we use the word Creole as politically correct. And so what it was a language study of black people in St. Martin Parish, but his subject was healing. So he gathered over 500 recipes or formulas for healing as the people in St. Martinville would speak. And they speak in a Creole dialect. They have a Haitian influence in their language. It's not standard, but I can understand it. If you talk, you can understand it. So I didn't know what to do with this thing, so I gave it to my professor because he would know what to do. Because I have a degree in anthropology, but that doesn't make me an anthropologist. I mean, so he said, we need to make a copy of this. And to make a copy, we need to talk to LSU. So LSU is in Baton Rouge, and this thesis had been written at LSU. So he said, we have to get permission. That man was 100 years old, right? If he wrote this in 1933. I'm thinking, I wonder if he's dead, because, chances are he was. But he wasn't. And Dr. Brasseux met this Charles Bienvenu, spoke with him on the phone, got his permission, and we were able to get a copy of his original paper that is at LSU. And so there's a whole body of work about African Americans who did healing work in St. Martin Parish that is available, and it comes under the name of Traiteurs. And whether what they did was a simple prayer or making a tea or using the blood of a chicken, it's what they brought to the table under the word Traiteur.
Okay.
And there are Native American words in a lot of these prayers, and the Native Americans also were traiteurs. And in a simple form, a traiteur is one who says a prayer, and usually there's a specific gesture and a specific prayer for a specific ailment. But there's an exception to every rule. So I think they just give us rules so we learn what the exceptions are instead of learning the rules. But so I did a research in at the university, and my research was just to ask people about the transference of the gift. And one man said, I can give it to as many people as I want as long as they're younger than me. Because the tradition on that is an older person gives it to a younger person, a woman gives it to a man gives it to a woman. And after you give it, you either quit using it then.
You quit using it then?
Or you continue using it and they wait until you die to use it. It was a one-on-one lineage and a one-on-one thing. I'm thinking, if this man's going to give it to a lot of people, because he says he can, what harm is there in that? And then there was one lady who, her children told her she shouldn't do that anymore, so she quit. The priest said I shouldn't, so she quit. Someone said, so she quit. So she had these issues. And then there was another man I interviewed, and he had received some prayers from a man and some prayers from a woman, and it didn't matter. And he had quite a number of prayers he had received. Because the reality of this is that over the years, a lot of people are not going to accept the gift for any number of reasons, besides I'm not good enough, or I'm not Jesus, or I'm not an apostle. It's also I don't want to be bothered, and it's also I'm not good enough, really, what would I do with that? Well, if y'all know anybody who was a traiteur, they're not that good. They're not that bad, but really. And everybody has somebody in their family. They're just a person. If we wait till we're good enough, we're not going to help each other till we're all dead or too old to. So there's that's basically how it how I understand it came to be. It has roots in Europe, but then it has roots in Africa, but then it has roots in the Native American traditions, and we just kind of pull together.
So what you're saying is that, well, the term traiteur, the people have a different way of working under that umbrella. So it may not be just as an herbalist, say, or somebody that passes prayers, or
it was never as an herbalist.
Okay.
But it was always as an herbalist, because back in the day, everybody was an herbalist.
Uh-huh.
And you made poultices, and you made teas, and everybody that lived knew which plants. But wait, the plants that were in Europe and the plants that were in Canada were not the same as the plants that were here.
Right.
So we had to learn from the people that were here what was and what wasn't medicinal.
Mm-hmm.
And so we learned from them. But using Mongolier to make a tea, and using Mammut to make cough syrup, and using mustard to make a poultice was common knowledge. The prayer was what was the Traiteur's piece. That was separate. And the prayer was simply a prayer.
So
in French. Sometimes it had a Hail Mary and an Our Father and a Glory Be with it, but it was a simple prayer in French. And he just said that. And if nobody got better, find something else to do, remember?
So when you were talking about the gentleman who received a lot of prayers, were they from different traiteurs, were they the same prayer, or were they different prayers? How?
No. There's one prayer for like an earache.
Okay.
One prayer for headaches. One prayer for sunstroke. One prayer for a sprained ankle. One prayer for whooping cough. Another prayer for diphtheria, and just different illnesses.
So what you're saying, because I actually, if you all are able to get a hold of this, it's really an interesting book. I just saw a painting back in here somewhere, and it was of a traiteur who only worked with earaches. Yeah,
because as I understand, a medicine man would do medicine for the village.
Mm-hmm.
And over here, it was a community gift. Your mama may treat for headaches, and your mama may treat for sprained ankles, and your daddy can treat for thrush. And so different people had this gift. And another tradition with that is you never tell the traiteur thank you. Well, it's not because you weren't grateful, but it was because it wasn't the traiteur, but God who was doing the work. So it allowed for humility to remain.
Mm-hmm.
Because how can you take credit for something you're just making a request or holding a space to happen? How can that become an ego thing?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But it does.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was a...
So, and I don't know, like for instance, in some indigenous traditions, they do not talk about the initiation and that kind of thing. So I'm not sure exactly how much you can talk about that, but I'm wondering when someone is giving a prayer to someone else, essentially it's an initiation of some sort. And so I'm wondering what that process is like. Is there? Can you talk about that?
Yeah, because it's really not a process.
Okay.
And that's why when I studied, I took a course, I think it was called Ethno something or other with Jacques Henri, and my subject was the transmission of the gift.
Mm-hmm.
Because, so you go see somebody and she says, I think I'm going to give you this prayer, and you say yes. So she says the prayer, and that's it. You got it. I wanted it to be like a thing.
Mm-hmm. Well, and when
it's like not a thing.
Yeah, yeah. So my question was more about. I'm just wondering if the traiteur themselves feel some kind of energy passing through them to the other person or anything like that. Not a process over a period of months or years.
But in the people that I interviewed, no one ever spoke of a feeling.
Okay.
No one ever spoke of a sense of before or after. when you got the prayer because you knew that it was in you. But for the people that I spoke with, that I interviewed, that their grandma had given him their prayer, it was in the kitchen one time, it was in another place. This is the prayer, poof, and that was it. Mm-hmm. There was no hoopla. And I think the secret is there's no secret. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That we can all do this. Mm-hmm. If you forget the prayer, then do something else. It wasn't meant for you. If you pray on people that don't get better, then just do something else. Mm-hmm. And it was also something we used on animals, not just on people. But I never heard of a specific feeling you have with it. You just receive it and you use it. I had been already doing healing work, in healing touch and Reiki, when Miss Eva, one of the ladies that came to, right. You met her, that was crazy. She lives in Scott now. She asked a number of us at this holistic wellness network if we were Traiteurs, and I said no, but my grandfather was, but he died of an aneurysm. I said, he never gave me his prayer. She said, well, do you want the prayer? And I'm like, well, yeah. But then I want to say, but you're not supposed to give it to me because you're a lady and I'm a lady. I'm supposed to get this from a man. Okay, because tradition says. But I didn't say, and so she gave me the prayer. And it's in the book, but it's an incorrect prayer because it's not about the words.
Since we've moved into that, would you be willing to tell your story as to how everything unfolded for you, and maybe even from the Reiki and the healing touch and those kind of things?
Right. In 1989, I had a right modified radical mastectomy because I had breast cancer. And one of the nuns at Our Lady of Lourdes said, I think you should look into healing work. And I'm like, there's something wrong with her. But I mean, I was in bed and I couldn't tell her or challenge her. And you have a lot of time to think when you're in the hospital. So yeah, I remembered Grandpa had been a Traiteur. I'm thinking, well, I guess if he can, I can. But she wasn't a Traiteur. She was a nun who had studied Reiki, so I studied Reiki. And then after I studied Reiki, one of the Reiki instructors said, you should learn healing touch, so I learned healing touch. And then at some point, it just dawned on me, those were just ways to claim your own healership, which everybody has. So then when Miss Eva offered me the Traiteur prayer, I said, yeah. And then after that, I studied anthropology and was able to study some of these things in my own culture as personal study, like legitimate study. And I understood and was able to see healing in other cultures. I don't know how I was going to ever claim I was an indigenous healer. I didn't even think I was an indigenous person. How can I be indigenous if half of my people don't even, they come from Europe, so I'm not of this place. But we were of this place long enough with other people who were not of this place either long enough. Somehow I think we are some sort of unique, and we got our own answers and we helped each other when we needed. So from there, it was a discovery of healing in terms of the energetics of healing, but it was also a discovery of the power of the ability to heal in everybody I know.
Are there certain beliefs that you hold as a Traiteur or as a healer in general?
Well, I grew up Catholic. Okay, so there's this sense of the mystery, and there's this sense of faith as Catholic people. We grew up in a community. We still have community, like you're related to everybody else in town. There was a church. You went to that church or not, and so we all went to that church because in the beginning, like in my grandparents' generation, they were building the churches in Scott. That's just like 2 generations ago. So it was about a faith community, and whether you liked everybody in the community or not, it didn't matter, because you don't like everybody. You don't even like your own family. That doesn't matter. There was this thing about about taking care of each other in how we ate, in how we lived, in what we did. And that doesn't happen in every community.
No, it doesn't.
And there's also something about the collective unconscious of the people that live here. And I want to research on the collective unconscious of the African Americans and the Native Americans and the French-speaking Americans, all of us under this umbrella. We all came through some bad stuff. We all came through not having a home.
Mm-hmm.
We were all displaced. And so for us, home is important. And home is so important for us, we like it so much we'll invite anybody to come home. Even if we never met you before. Mm-hmm. You're feeling that now. Mm-hmm. That's a vestige of what is a part of a culture that has nothing to do with the name or the kind of church. Hell, we could have been Jewish people. Mm-hmm. But you live in isolation and you live in family and you have a boucherie and you share the food, or we ain't going to live it. We're not going to make it. Mm-hmm. So it was the isolation that caused us to live in community, and that caused the communities to come together when it was necessary, and then we could be separate if we didn't think it was necessary. But we made it together, so it was community, like faith as a community, faith as not the words. Mm-hmm. And I don't know this, and I don't know how many of you were raised as Protestants. Were any of you in this room raised as a Protestant? Okay. I used to work in Vermilionville, and one time this lady came to me and she said, "Do you know the difference between New Orleans and Natchitoches?" Like, no. Well, she said New Orleans is Catholic and Natchitoches is not. Like, I had never even been to Natchitoches, you know. She says the people in New Orleans know God loves everybody, even if you're poor. And the people in Natchitoches think God only loves you if He has blessed you. Now, I don't know what she meant by that, but I got something out of that. And I don't know if that makes sense to y'all. But in the small towns here, it didn't matter if you had a lot or if you didn't have a lot. God loved everybody. Mm-hmm. And we didn't have the puritanic stuff of some of that all-American.
Right, right.
And we also had kind of a attitude. Like when I was growing up, the men used to go outside and smoke during the sermon or during church while the women and the kids stayed in church. I didn't either, but the old men, older than me, like they could go out and smoke during church, but there was a lot of like double standards for a lot of things. And so just because we all went to church doesn't mean we did everything.
Sure, yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Right.
But there was this basic feeling that every being had some sense of sacred, and it was your duty to take care of everybody. And so when we had a boucherie, you shared it with your neighbors who also happened to be your relatives. Sometimes it's hard to tell the difference between who is my cousin and who is my friend, even to this day, because we're so connected. Mm-hmm. You know, my cousin, I had lunch at her house when her family moved from St. Martinville to Scott. Their daddy told the children, you can't date anybody unless they live at least 60 miles away from Scott, or you're going to be dating your cousin. Mm-hmm. That's true. So they didn't. And so there's this, it's endogamous, it's inbreeding, it's that other people don't have. But it's also something someone told me, that the people from here live from our emotion. We live from our lower three chakras. We interact and communicate that way, which doesn't mean we aren't spiritual, it doesn't mean we aren't intellectual, but there's this emotional thing we have as a culture that I never really, but when that person told me, I'm like, yeah, I think that's true. So this is just things that were told to me that might make sense to you, but it resonated with me. That kind of interrelationship, interconnection.
One of the things that you'd asked me to do is to share from, you know, the native cultures or traditions really that I've interacted with, and And so one of the things that I'm hearing that's very much in common is about community, you know. So within those Native traditions I'm familiar with, it's not about the individual, but it's about the community and the community's wellness as a whole.
And I remember my own self when I moved into a house that was big enough that I could house. The gatherings began at this house so we could have a community of people who are interested in this. But they could come and go. It's not about a class. It's not about this. It's about a community because community as I knew it as a child doesn't exist.
So are you saying that present day it doesn't exist, or because you just said the community you knew as a child doesn't exist? So
Yeah.
what does that mean?
As a child, we were still isolated here in Lafayette.
Okay.
The interstate didn't come till the 70s. The oil boom didn't come until then. If you went to church, I knew everybody that sat in every pew. I knew which mass they went to. And my mom and dad knew what everybody did for a living. And so if you were a traiteur, you didn't hang a shingle. But whoever knew you did that would just call you because we knew. We don't have that same knowing of each other anymore. Most of what I do is by word of mouth. Okay. And there's all kinds of people who do all kinds of healing now. So when you do it at no charge, it's hard to make that into a business. It's acceptable. But it's a process of going to that place. Because I was trained as a healer with a lot of people who were counselors. So the gifts are being supported in what is available today for how they can be supported. We have a lot of people who do all kinds of healing, so it's not about the Traiteur or not, but if you look strictly at the Traiteur tradition and that it's basically passed down to someone in your family or someone you know really well, that's not like happening as much as it was.
Is there a sense of, when you receive a prayer as a Traiteur, is there a sense of responsibility that you
have to be available when people call.
Right. And so I'm wondering if maybe that's a part of it, is that people don't necessarily want to be available. I'm also wondering, because it's often true, not always, but often true in these traditions that I know of, that if someone is offered, you know, if the calling comes but they don't accept it, that there's actually some kind of consequence that comes along. Are you familiar with anything like that?
As far as I know, no.
Okay.
But in the tradition of every healer, healers have been through difficult times in order to work with other people, or it seems to enhance at least their compassion. So if, according to what you say, I've been really hesitant and no other illnesses or difficult things happen to me, I got it from this day forward. I went with a friend to visit with Father Manny, who is a Filipino by culture, but he's a Catholic priest by trade, and he has the gift of healing. And a social worker friend of mine and I went to visit with him, and basically he said, if you don't use it, you lose it. But he never said, and if you don't use it, you'll break your leg, or God will get you for that. So I'm not sure that exists here, and maybe that was a wake-up call for him. But I believe in my own heart that every difficulty and every illness I've ever had has prepared me to be able to be okay with other people and to help them from, well, if I'm okay, then you can be okay too. But I never heard that there was any consequence.
Well, one of the things that we talked about had to do with mental illness. And did you want to talk about that? And
yes, one of the illnesses I had.
Yeah.
This is a good thing. I think I've read about shamans and the initiation to become a shaman. If you don't become a shaman, you have shaman's sickness or shaman's illness, and for the rest of your life, you're wigged out. You're disconnected because the initiations are intense initiations. And without having been into any shamanic initiations, I just basically have mental illness. And it's something that runs in my family. And I had some cousins visiting from California, and we were just talking about that. So there's also a big connection between shamans and drumming. I was a drummer when I was in high school. I remember my cadence, and I'm 60 years old. Okay, so I was drawn to that. Had nothing to do with tribal drumming, but I do that when I can. And so I think that my mental illness, as I learned about the shamanic thing, I can incorporated it as a blessing in my life. Mm-hmm. And when I was in the throes of depression or in the highs of mania, and I wasn't communicating with anybody else around me, well, then I guess then you get something. Just like if I had cancer and I learned from it, I'm better because I had it. I don't want y'all to have cancer, and I hope none of you have mental illness, but if I did it, then you can get through it, and there's some giftedness in every difficult thing we ever have. Mm-hmm. And I think it's an accepting of that, knowing you can go beyond that illness brings you. But I also believe that our, as an American society's perception of mental illness is based on a judgment and getting those people out of sight. Mm-hmm. Okay? Because my grandmother died in Pineville when she was 53. Mm-hmm. And I don't know what she had, like if she had a diagnosis. Because that was like before there was a medical model, right? You just lock her ass up, for lack of a better word. Mm-hmm. We don't deal with that. Mm-hmm. She had 11 children. Maybe postpartum depression got a hold of her head. Mm-hmm. I could see, I have no idea what. Then my father, when I was 12, died from suicide. But there wasn't a medical model either. But socially speaking, you didn't talk about someone after they died from suicide because you just didn't. So his brothers didn't even talk about it. So it was like he kind of disappeared. And then in my lifetime, I was fortunate to have a medical model. And so even if people treated me in some bizarre fashion because I was mentally ill, and there are times in my life when you would have known I was mentally ill, and then when I get well, people say, oh, you must have been misdiagnosed. And I'm like, you weren't there. You know, really. And so you just have to deal with the fact that you know how they would treat you if they ever saw that. It's just difficult to deal with. And most recently, I was at Festival La Cadière. And I'm not going to name his name, but there's this counselor in town who's also my neighbor in Scott. You can figure this out. We live in very close proximity to each other.
Probably not hard for you all, right?
No, it wouldn't be hard. So, like, I have introduced him to a nurse friend because now professional people are walking and owning healership, mm-hmm. no matter where you come from. It's beyond the tribes. People coming from all tribes, and we're honoring healership because that's what Healing Touch is about. It's about nurses coming together to honor healership in other nurses and lay people. It doesn't matter if you're Native American, Jewish, Catholic, Protestant. So then where do you go as a group? So I introduced him to this nurse friend of mine, and all of a sudden it hit me. This guy was a counselor when I was really out of it. Okay? So she's sitting between us, and all of a sudden I looked at him and I said, hey, you remember that hospital? And I couldn't stop laughing because I know some of the bizarre behavior that I exhibited at this hospital. And he's looking at me and he's laughing, and I can't stop laughing. I was so excited because he knew I was well. It's like so cool to be well. Mm-hmm. And then I had a guest, and she was saying, oh, well, you had a hospitalization once? And I'm thinking, lady, I had like maybe 15 of them. It was ongoing. I didn't have this as a choice. I had to get well to live, and then as you get well, you share with other people. But in that moment, it was such a gift for him to ask me, how'd you get well? I'm like, I'm well. I'm well because he asked. Mm-hmm. And I don't know where wellness comes from. A lot of choice.
Well, and you know, before all this started, we were having a discussion, and in a lot of the tribal cultures, if someone in our culture, what we call mental illness or something like that really isn't to them. You know, it's some kind of special capability that's actually nurtured because they're out there touching other realms, and then they bring it back here and inform the community. And so, you know, that's why I was asking you the question, is because really a lot of the people that have the capabilities that you do, or artists, you know, people that live on the edge and they're touching the mystery, they're not always considered to be normal by our culture, you know, which is a crying shame that's not nurtured rather than...
Because it's a resource we can't tap into because we judge it. And then
afraid of it.
We get afraid of it, that's it.
I think it's fear.
It needs to be defined, and if you don't fit, then you don't fit.
Right.
And then, so if for my father in my father's time, there was no medical model, and my grandmother had been locked up literally, and then my child dies from suicide. And so how do I deal with that? Because she didn't accept a medical model. And could she have? And had she, would she still be here? And, you know, I just think, well, she came, she did what she had to do, and she checked out. Well, you can't tell that to most people because they think you're really crazy. And, you know, I'm not in the institution, and my friend said I was well, so I know I'm not crazy now. But when you start looking at these things from these other perspectives, not the European perspective, not the medical model perspective, when you look to inspire people and something that's beyond the box, one of the reasons I didn't want to say my daughter had mental illness or to look at that was because I didn't want her to be put in a box. I didn't want the grandness of her whole life to be reduced to, oh, she was just wigged out, or she wouldn't have gone that way, so then we won't talk about her either. And I don't know what we can do as a society. But there's not enough hospitals to put all the ADHD people in. There's not enough medicine to dumb us up forever. So something else is going to have to come up. And I don't know what that is. And I don't know how we can accept the fact that mental illness could be a gift. If you can talk, you can sing. If you can walk, you can dance. If you touch with love, somebody can get healed.